Is the UN failing the Palestinians? Top UN human rights official Craig McIver has resigned after publicly accusing the United Nations of failing to address what he calls a textbook case of genocide against Palestinian civilians in the besieged Gaza Strip, as Israeli bombardment, which began after Hamas's surprise attack on 7th of October, saw entire residential neighborhoods decimated. Thousands of civilians killed, the majority of whom are women and children, and basic life necessities such as water, food, electricity and fuel cut to Gaza's 2.2 million people. In his resignation letter, McIver said, "Once again we are seeing a genocide unfolding before our eyes, and the organization we serve appears powerless to stop it."
We need all states, members of the United Nations, to use whatever influence they have to ensure an end to these attacks on civilians in Gaza, to ensure as well accountability for the perpetrators, redress for the victims, protection for the vulnerable there.
McIver called on the UN to attach the same standards to Israel as it does when assessing human rights violations in other countries around the world.
We have a formula at the United Nations that is applied to virtually every other conflict situation. But when it comes to the situation in Israel and Palestine, there's a different set of rules, apparently. And that's, I think, a big source of my frustration.
Israel has called for the UN Secretary of State, Antonio Guterres, to resign after he said Hamas's attack on October 7 did not happen in a vacuum, accusing him of justifying terrorism.
When you say those terrible words that these heinous attacks did not happen in a vacuum, you are tolerating terrorism.
Well, of course, you can imagine why the ambassador would want to start the clock only in October and to ignore the decades upon decades of persecution against the Palestinian people in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, inside Israel proper. But that is not the kind of assessment that leads to peace or leads to an improved situation on the ground. The Secretary General was doing his job. He had condemned the loss of civilian life in the Hamas attack, and he also criticized not just what Israel was doing in Gaza, but all of the events that have led up to this situation.
The United Nations General Assembly voted overwhelmingly for a humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza on 27th of October, with 120 votes in favor, while 45 countries abstained and 14, including Israel and the United States, voted against a ceasefire.
Protection of civilians.
Israel's UN ambassador, Gilad Erdan, rejected the resolution, saying the UN no longer holds any legitimacy or relevance, and accused those who voted yes of preferring to support the defense of Nazi terrorists instead of Israel. In the meantime, Israel warplanes have continued to strike UN-run schools in Gaza, where thousands of people fleeing bombardment have sought shelter. UNRWA's director in the Gaza Strip, Thomas White, said that the UN flag is no longer sufficient to protect the approximately 600,000 Palestinians who fled to the schools, seeking protection under international humanitarian law. Craig McIver's resignation underlines a growing disillusionment with international institutions, particularly the United Nations, which was established after World War II in order to prevent similar atrocities to those committed during the war and to promote international peace, justice and better living for all mankind.